Alright, that's section 2 of the Firenock. We will now move into, do you guys prefer to learn the vein first or the insert first? The vein is a little bit more fun, the insert is critical. You want to grind or you want to go tech?
Whichever way you want.
Okay, then well, let's go with the Aerovein then. So we can learn a little bit more about what the second product Firenock in his lifetime ever come up is the Aerovein. Well, Aerovein changed quite a bit for the last few, they have not changed any bit for the last 8 years, okay? What is Aerovein? The Aerovein is the first ever airfoil based vein. What does that really mean? That means the vein do not use drag, but use circular lift. Now, when you do circular lift, that means that when you have 3 or 2 or 4 separate surfaces, each is perfectly mounted to the center and an exact angle. When they force themselves towards one side, all concurrently, you end up with a circle. That itself is called circular lift. Circular lift never happened anywhere on this planet until we come along. Because it's like a reverse propeller. Now, if you think, imagine this. What happens if one of the blades on a propeller is not perfect? What would happen to the engine?
Vibration.
Vibration first, the next thing will blow up because the vibration becomes so much, it finally goes. Now imagine we're using the same principle, but this time we reverse it. When the air passes through a surface based on Bernoulli principle, one air surface is moving faster than the other surface. Whatever the faster is going to have a negative, and the positive side is going to push it around. That's where lift process come in. Now we make Aerovein 2 in 2007, okay? Aerovein 1, 2007, and we learned a lot over the process. First of all, the original Aerovein 1 have 2 surfaces, and the surfaces are perfectly polished. Based on my inability to learn, I finally able to find some really great person like Professor Lele of Stanford University, Professor Salek of Central Illinois University, and a few other professors that I called. Finally, I got to meet Professor Salek face to face. And the first thing I do, I give him my Aerovein 1, original Aerovein 2. You look at it and say, interesting design. Why is it so smooth? I say, so you can glide through the air with no friction. You look at me sort of like smile a little bit. You say, do you know that when you have perfect surface going through air, you do drag? I say, what? They say, the perfect surface in air do not work because it will drag. Because surface tension. I said, what's that? Then he said, go ahead, read these few books. And of course, after I finished reading and find out that, I just don't know anything. So I think this is the time I better hire somebody to help me. I was very lucky to get Professor Lele to spend a little bit of time with me and teach me about aspect ratio of airfoil, which is the reason the owl wing structure. See this portion of the Aerovein right here? It's the same aspect ratio than an owl. You know what's so unique about owl? It's the only animal that flies in air without sound. Can you imagine when you make an arrow, they can fly in the air without sound? What does that mean? There's no fluttering. There's no alert of animal. As a matter of fact, do you know animals don't jump strings? Yeah, animal will jump tree stands because it's a very unusual sound. When your tree stand quick with that metal click, you can forget about it. You might just go home. But most of the sound the animal is really jumping is a sound from the vein and the sound from the broadhead. There's some really bad broadhead out there. And I think you really need to go and find out, based on your combination, some broadhead is not really meant to be shot. They were meant to be bought and look good. When you start shooting those broadhead in the high speed, they literally behave like whistles. Think about it. If you make sound with your bow, the sound stops at where you are and slowly fade out. If your arrow is making sound, the sound is going towards the animal. As it goes towards the animal, it gets louder and louder, isn't it? So, what's so unique about Aerovein? The first thing we talk about is that it's a lift-based system. When you do a lift-based system, remember I told how precise it has to be? When we first make Aerovein, we tell people, oh, you can use Spitzenberger with a Trojan and so on. It never worked. because we cannot get the precision of the vein on it. The moment you're shooting under 260, 270, or 280 feet per second, it doesn't matter, because it's nothing more than a piece of plastic, just like a piece of feather, just like other veins. It don't do nothing except it sort of give you a little bit of guidance, and that's the end of it. But the moment you go to over 270, 280, or the new, like the scope binoculars at 460 feet per second, it becomes a very big deal. Because imagine this, you're driving down a highway with a Jumbo 7, with any airplane, say at 50 miles per hour. What's going to happen to it? Nothing. There's no speed there. But the moment when you're at 270 feet per second, now we're talking some speed here. The circular lift kicked in. When I first tested this, when Matthew was kind enough to test it for me, Gary Simon, he told me on a straight vein, if that is a speed about 270 feet per second, an Aerovein 1 spin 29 times more than a blazer, just on lift. Just sit back a little bit and think about what I just told you. If a blazer normally turns between straight vein, 1 to 3 turns, we're 29 times, we're 90 already. The moment we moved, of course, then we went through a small legality issue with New Harrisburg, but they are very kind. They give me a license to finish it because they know I do not design this to step on their pattern. They let me sell off what I have, and I redesigned the Aerovein so the left and the right side of my vein is the same texture, which do not violate their quick spin. But the moment I did that, I actually make Aerovein 2 very workable. What happened is that Aerovein 2 is now thicker. The Aerovein have actually 3 major features in it. If you look at this picture right here, Aerovein 2 have 3 texture zones. That means there are 3 different fixed textures on the vein when the air passes through it. But Aerovein do not just behave like Aerovein when the vein passes through. Yes, it's stiff, but it also got aerodynamic elasticity memory in it. That means when a vein actually passes, the Aerovein will actually do this by itself. Not just going straight, it actually curves itself. The moment it curves itself, see what's so big deal about curving itself? Now imagine this, when an vein is going forward and the arrow is spinning so fast, the air is hitting this part of the vein, isn't it? That is called the angle of attack. When your vein is have angle of attack, you now instantly, just like you putting a hand out into the outside of a car driving 655 miles per hour, and all of a sudden you move your hand like this. This becomes your angle of attack. The wings are pushing and the whole hand goes like this way. What we want to do is that we want to make the vein to aim at the angle of what is rotating. But we already know that the arrow is moving from 0 to 280 feet per second, whatever that you're shooting, and slowly decelerate, right? So when the moment you hit 280, 290, or 300, 350, what is the optimum angle of rotation of the vein? Answer is that you cannot possibly know that. So how can we possibly do that to make the vein work for us? So we built in aerodynamic elasticity memory. That means based on a geometer, which is the hardness of the vein, we calculate what thickness of the vein based on the plastic. So at certain rotation, because the lift of the vein, it will yawn into the angle. And the yawn into an angle will match with the angle of attack, with the minimum. So if we do all this calculation and get it, guess what? As the arrow spins faster, the vein is going to yawn higher, the angle of attack is going to close to 0. Well, if you do all this, what does that mean? The drag is now close to 0 or approaching 0. If the drag is approaching 0, we still maintain our stiffness. What do we got? We now got a vein that will rotate ultra high speed with 0 drag, with no sound, and super accurate. Because see, by doing so, now this is another phenomenon a lot of people are not aware of. I will go into this a little bit deeper, because this is where it becomes very important to know. See that? Imagine this is the arrow, okay? This is your veins are coming out. A lot of people say, well, I really need to reduce the diameter of my arrow when I have heavy wind. You know, I prove to everybody that they are wrong. The arrow size have nothing to do with the wind when you have crosswinds, unless you're shooting under 260 feet per second. Because at that moment, there is no effect on the vane, everything is on the shaft. The moment you shoot a certain speed, your vane and your broadhead is the only thing. Now, look at this, I'm going to show you. When this vane is hitting the wind, as say at this moment, we call it, we're using this as to show you how the offset or helical is. When the wind hit this, the wind do not just hit this. That is reaction from this vane coming back. Because you're actually going through a column of air, am I right? When you go through a column of air, there's no terms to describe these as, so I have to invent terms to describe this. I call it the crosswind signature. That means on a certain arrow, going through the wind at certain speed, and you leave a signature of air disturbance. That's what I call a crosswind signature. If I put a quick spin at 300 feet per second into a normal air, on a quick spin 1.0, that crosswind signature is about 12 inches. That means 12 inches in diameter. What does that mean? That means I got a column of air of 12 inches being disturbed. When you have wind blowing, what's the wind blowing? The wind is blowing a column of air that's 12 inches in diameter. How big is this arrow? The biggest arrow is triple X. It's only this big. This size compared to 12 inches is insignificant. Now the moment we're able to control the crosswind signature and reduce it, now good thing I will inform you is that Aerovein 2 crosswind signature at max is 2 inches. Aerovein 3 is just under 1 inch. Think about what I just tell you, and now you will understand why Aerovein 2 and Aerovein 3, when there's wind blowing, when you shoot at over 280, technically 30 miles per hour wind have no effect on it. Now imagine this, there's always wind blowing, one way or the other, in any condition, and you want to shoot an animal at distance. How serious is that crosswind signature or the wind bucking ability of Aerovein is? Am I making sense now, or I know I feel like you may not get it, but ask questions if you don't, because see, I know they both take this before. So now that said, you notice one very critical part.
Did you understand that?
Little.
What's interesting to me, because I didn't get that the first time, is I didn't realize, if you imagine it, it's like having a foot around, if we're talking about the quick spin, it's having a foot of space for something, the wind to come and hit and move, where if it's just 2 inches or 1 inch of space for wind to hit, it doesn't affect as much, just like a sail, a bigger sail with the wind and a smaller sail or something like that.
Correct. It's the size of the sail, but you notice the sail itself, yes, it's what get it, but also we look at what happened to the edge of the sail. Some of the actions are even bigger, not just what you see. Same thing with Aerovein. It is not the size of the vane that makes the difference. It's what kind of air that vane was doing, interacting with the air. Now, a typical vane have 3 things against it. First of all, 99% of vane are same identical thickness. If we know everything with the same identical thickness, you have to deal with the number 1 enemy, fluttering. What does fluttering mean? That means when the air passing through a same identical surface, it causes another surface to wave. That's fluttering. That's a total robbing of energy. But then, people say, well, I got enough power. Doesn't matter. But that is not your concern. The concern is sound. That is what makes most of the vane make loud. It's a fluttering process. Now, if it's fluttering, what means to the shaft itself is creating harmonic in the shaft that robs the shaft from moving forward. That means you're losing energy as you move forward rapidly. That's another detrimental thing to long distance shooting, which also explains why in the old days people say, I should not take an archery shot more than 25 yards. Back in the 1989, when I first learned archery, I was told, anything over 30 yards, I'm out of my mind, stick with under 25. We know it's not the case today. because technology changed. Okay? Now, think through that. If there's no fluttering, there's less drag on the shaft. We know the Crosswind Signature is low. Why not everybody use Aerovein? There's the downside to it, and I'm going to address those. First of all, you remember, the Aerovein is based on circular lift, just like a propeller. How precise you have to put the vane on? Answer is that with Aerovein 2, I recommend no less than 1/4 degree. With Aerovein 3, 1/16 of a degree. Now, you say, well, that's not a lot. But then, if you look at the numbers, it's a lot. With the Bissenberger, you're guaranteed no less than 4 degree at best. Brand new one. And if you go to 01, you're pushing 17 degree per arrow. I know.
How old does it have to be?
2 or 3 years old.
Really? They were that bad then?
Because the collar
Yeah.
start wearing. And then also you mentioned your arrow that cling onto the V shape, start rocking.
I remember the last time you had told me, you know, this was something that was interesting. He said the way they were set from the factory, one was like 119, one was at 1...
No, that's not. That's the collar itself.
Yes.
Any condition. The Bissenberger is 120, 118, and 122. They're not 120 each. The reason for that because when you do the old Mako now on the 2219, the moment you go to the third one, you click on this, the shaft will rock. They compensate their rock by changing the degrees. Instead they expect it to rock, that's the reason to put a difference in it. Which makes sense. If you shoot a 2219 with a Mako now, you can compensate because it gives you back 3 degrees. But if you don't, you're dealing with say Eastern injection. The shaft is just thin. Now to just rock a little bit, now your vein will look like this. Instead of this, which way you should be. Now then, of course, we look at, in the old days, for anybody who are really serious, you find out they actually go ahead, they name the jig, they will change the inside, and initially we actually go so far as say people who don't want to buy by jig, I say, you know what, you can go ahead and get a seamless conversion with a Bissenberger jig, then you can put a 1/16" brass bar on the magnet side. It will work reasonably well. Yes, that whole process will bring the jig down to 1/4 degree accuracy. Because of the seamless conversion and us always deal with one thing. We are no longer dealing with the knock. We're dealing with the shaft. The moment you deal with the knock, you're doing the V-notch. As you move the thing piece, gravitational force will take over. You've got this slot right here. When you move the slot, well, that's variance, isn't it? You're not no longer dealing with a circle. Because the moment when you move from this position to this position, just move. Your error is already built into the jig. The moment you go to seamless conversion, you take out that problem. But you also have another set of problems. You said all of a sudden, you're dealing with a Bissenberger jig that moves up at an angle and offset. Why is this no good? In the old days, we're using Bowling Platinum Plus. We're using similar gel glue. What do? They supposedly not move. Now, on aluminum arrow, you need that because you need that mortar to fit the aluminum arrow with the vein on it, especially with feathers. But if you're dealing with a molded vein and you put something like this, you can put as much as 0.8 to 1.5 grain, or I've seen up to 2 grain per vein. If Blazer can give you 2 grain variants per 1,000 pack, over 5. That means the heaviest can be 7 grain, the lowest can be 3 grain. How are you going to make it spin correctly? And then you go on top of that, add 0.8 all the way to say, make it low, 2 grains of glue. You are stacking tolerance like you never believe. So how do you expect it to spin correctly? The answer, you couldn't. Now, with the Aerovein jig and the Aerovein clamp and our Aerovein, if you use the thing correctly, I will guarantee a 0.03 grain of glue per vein. Think about the numbers for a second. It's 2 grain or as low as 0.8. I'm giving you 0.03. And that means you can put 3 veins. Even you're 100% wrong, you're only at 0.06. compared to 0.8.
So in some cases, it's possible using the other glue to add more glue than the weight of your G-knock.
Exactly.
Yeah, about 2 grains heavier, right?
Now imagine, in the worst case scenario, a 2-grain glue with the 2-grain variance, you have 4 grain now off on the center. Isn't that funny? No, they're pure math. I'm just stacking them the way you could stack them. Of course, if you're careful, you're good, you can shave and do it, you'll bring it back better. But those are actual weight. Weight is your enemy. If you can't control it, weight is not your enemy, but off-center weight is. Just like a flywheel. If it's perfectly balanced, a few more ounces don't make a big deal. But if it's not balanced, a tiny bit will make a big deal. What do you think is the arrow doing in the air if you got a good arrow? Now, let's go back to the original Aerovein spin statistics. A normal blazer will spin to between 8 to 12 turns with a 2.5 degree offset in the first 20 yards.
I'm sorry, what was that, 8 to 12?
8 to 12 in the first 20 yards. A 60 yard is doing 6 to 8. Okay? It do not get higher, it get lower. Because the forward momentum, unless the drag takes place, the fluttering takes place. We tested on the OV tag, that's what, 3 years old, on the Aerovein, on the Aeroboat 200, which is just Aerovein 2, at 60 yard, the Aerovein 3, at 60 yard is doing 300 revolution every 20 yards. With no loss of speed and no sound. I think that should bring you a whole different idea what it does. That's what Aerovein is so special. But Aerovein is special if and only if you have the right tools to put it on. If you don't have the right tools, Aerovein is nothing more than a glorified quick spin. And sometimes worse. If you don't have speed, Aerovein also do not work well. Because when one vein will start fighting the other vein. If you don't have the right glue, don't have the right texture, they are not straight, now the vein really start to fight each other. Now it's worse than like you put a turkey feather on one side and goose feather on the other side. That's pretty much what it will boil down to.
So the faster that other style goes, the worse it gets. In a sense, they can't make a high rotational vein at that
Correct.
point.
Because see, all of a sudden you have unbalanced situation.
Did you say that first one was a quick spin?
Yes.
The original 8 to 20? I mean.
No, blazer.
Blazer?
Yes.
What will the quick spin do?
Quick spin, actually, I have not tested enough about it. The quick spin rotational weight is not higher because it's got a huge amount. See, if quick spin had changed the thickness of that would be better. But quick spin is very thick. It got a linear on one side and a texture on the other side. The moment you go with fluttering, it cannot recover from fluttering. Because you got enough material for it to do this.
That's who I was a huge fan of.
Oh, me too. Except when I use original quick spin, I'll tell you a story what happened to me. I was 32, 33 yards from a doe. I was hunting in Martinos. I pulled my arrow back. The wing was blowing exactly like that. Back then, I always believe light. I'm shooting 80 grain broadhead with the 4-inch quick spin. I shoot my arrow at the deer. No, it's not a joke. The arrow go into the deer. Next thing, the arrow goes sideways. I slap the deer with the shaft of the arrow. At less than 30 yards, the arrow actually go like this, and they go like this and slap the deer. It was that dramatic. I was like, what happened? First of all, I have a really low FOC, and the wind is really acting on the vein big time. Because I'm shooting original 4-inch, remember, those are 12 grain each. So my FOC is way low. But you know, you shoot great when I put a field point on it.
How heavy were your shafts?
Per
grain.
No, back then I was a big fan of the Carbon Force. I remember that. I have a 001. Back then, I'm one of those guys who look at catalogs and numbers only. Oh, Carbon Force 001. This is the best. The price is good. Then I slap the quick spin on it, and then I say, I want this arrow to be so light to go perfectly with my Oneida. Well, when that bolt goes off, it's like a .22 rifle. But then when the arrow goes like this, And I like this and slap the deer. Bad arrow. No. No, it's not. It's all me. Trust me. Because I do not understand any of those. That pretty much is the bottom line. I mean, a lot of people thought that, this is the best in here. But it's like, you go with the best, get the best Ferrari engine, with the best Lamborghini chassis, with the best Maserati suspension, you put it together, best car. I don't think you can drive it. Just because of the best of one area, you have to look for balance, optimization, how they all work together. For the last, I will share with you, for the last 12 years, what I found out the biggest problem is that how do you put all of them together? And a lot of times, especially in the next session, you'll find out, I'm trying to solve everybody's issue. To the point that I finally said, you know what? It's great that I solve everybody's issue. What happens if I decide to build it from ground up? There's no more issue to solve. But the fact is that I solved everybody's issue. I learned so much more. Because now I learn, why is this arrow, when I put Aerovein, don't spin right? Why is this arrow with the insert in it, with the perfect build, don't fly right? Every time when I go into deeper, I found there's more problem. And more problem. And more problem. See, I was very lucky to work with people like Jim Camp, our sculptor. He called me in 2007, say, hey Dodge, I got a crossbow shoot at 425. I said, that sounds pretty damn fast. It sure is. Then everything exaggerates. Everything that I have, the problem just compound. Because at that speed, every single mistake showed up so fast. Like Aeroveins. Just because back then I used a different glue than what I do now. Back then I said, oh, Bowling Platinum Plus, it worked perfectly. No, it didn't. I cannot control the weight of the glue. Also, you can use Joe Jam with a pin, it will work good. No, it didn't. There's variance in accuracy. Oh, you can put pressure on it. No, the pressure was wrong. It was not at the exact angle. I learned those because I have believed that I did right and everything showed up wrong. That's where it brings me to today. Like our Aeroveins. Now, like when we go into Aerovein 3, which you can see the catalog right here. Why is Aerovein 3 so much more than Aerovein 2? Well, let's go back to that history class that we have at Aerovein. When Professor Saley was telling me, texture it. When I texture it on Aerovein 2, you see the 3-layer of texturing? The Aerovein actually was thicker by about 20 thousandths. What happened when you have aerodynamic elasticity memory on a material, all of a sudden thicker by 20 thousandths? The aerodynamic elasticity memory effect drops. Because you no longer can flex like this. Because it's thicker. If it doesn't flex like this, what that means? You got more guiding ability. Which means it's more forgiveness. That is more ability to deal with a not so good broadcast. Then also all these years are saying, well, I can't shoot with this broadhead, can't shoot with that broadhead. You know the reason? The broadhead is not balanced. The broadhead is not centered. The broadhead has major aerodynamic flaw in it. I mean, it's okay if you only shoot, imagine you only shoot 4 to 8 or 12 revolutions every 20 yards. It's not a big deal. But what happens if you spin it, I say, 200? Any flaw expanded dramatically. Like a few broadhead I used to love. When they lower the QC, the blade can be 3 grains off. Well, what happened? You got a blade that's 3 grains off in the front and rotating at, say, as little as 120. What do you think is going to happen to the arrow? It's not going to fly right. Then that's the reason I say, well, if I'm going to remake Aerovein 2, which I decided not to, let's do everything we learned in Aerovein 2 and go one step further. Because I want to minimize the Crosswind Signature to another level. You notice the Aerovein 2, the height of here. Okay? This actually got folded down to form Aerovein 3. So in other words, Aerovein 2 and Aerovein 3, we said, wait a minute, Aerovein 3 is lighter. What happened? Well, you also remember that Aerovein 2 was regrind, resurfaced, and made 20,000 thicker. Aerovein 3 is using original Aerovein 2 model, which means make Aerovein 3 is lighter to start with because the mold is thinner. which means it's more flexible, which also makes the aerodynamic elasticity memory is higher. Then, from what I have learned from Professor Selig, the Aerovein 3 also added one of the latest and the greatest invention, winglet. Now, if you guys fly, you notice all the new airplane, there's not a single airplane left without the winglet on it. You can go to any airport, there's not a single plane commercially without winglet on it. Do you know why? It saves about 5 to 10% fuel. It's that much more efficient. Now imagine if you're a Delta, you spend $2.3 billion on fuel. What does 10% mean? That means $210 million on fuel save. How can you not put it on? Now imagine this, if we put this on, what does that mean to us as an archer using Aerovein 3? The Crosswind Signature just dropped 30%. That means my 2-inch diameter on the air just become 1.25 inches to 1 inch. But then the winglet also has one ability. As the air passing over the winglet, okay, you don't have flow out. Because usually when the air go to the vane, it flow out of it because it's higher speed. But the winglet created a pocket for the air to go through, which means that now the air speed increases even more. The aerodynamic elasticity memory become more efficient. The airspeed is higher. The Crosswind Signature is lower. For that reason, when last time we tested with a Scorpion VTEC with my Aeroboat G, I get an actual, I stopped counting at 300. Because I'm not sure what the number is. But I think I'll just say at least 300. Then I stopped. Because I can't count that much. My camera is not that fast. But 300 is a very big number, no matter how. And not to mention, if you look at some of our older video, back in 2012, you can see people shooting 106 yards at 30 miles per hour wind, shoot 3 arrows at and broke 2 of them. I think that's good enough. With a ramcat, by the way. With a 1 3/8-inch ramcat. That's with a very well-tuned crossbow with a very good shooter. It's actually on our website, you can check it out. Alright, that pretty much explains the possibility of what Aerovein does and why it's critical to put Aerovein on it. Now, you already understand now, by now you understand how critical the vane is in the design. So, what do we need to do to optimize Aerovein? This is where this guy, my Aerovein jig, come in. Why didn't I just long time ago call Firenock Pro jig or everything? Why did I call it the Aerovein jig? Because this jig was made for one and only one reason, to make Aerovein shine. Because without this jig, and you don't have this jig, you must well not get Aerovein, especially Aerovein 3. That's the reason this is called the Aerovein jig. Now, in order to get the Aerovein jig right, this actually took me about 3 years to finish. I now have every single accessory possible for a pro shop to use this jig only to flush anything. From a blazer to a quick spin all the way down to feather. You can use this jig to flush it all. This jig, I have all the collets. At this moment, we make it as big as 315. Will there be more? Based on demand. Possibility exists. Yes, sir?
Just to back up a little bit before we get into the jigs too far, can you explain when you start getting into high rotational flight, what that does for the arrow in terms of weight and how it makes it go?
Oh yes, absolutely. On the Aerovein itself. Okay. Let me go back into the flying characteristic of a normal arrow with a normal vane. Remember, the arrow shoot at an angle coming out of the bow because never flat. If you flat, it drops. So if you want to shoot perpendicular, the arrow have to go a little bit higher, and then it will behave like this and hit the target. That's what the arrow does. Okay? Why is the arrow doing this? You have an angle arc because, and you shoot at it. The moment you launch the arrow out, the wing is going to flutter. The shaft is going to flex. We all know that, right? You do know that the arrow is going to flex like up and down, left, right, a little bit, rotate, and the tail of the arrow is going to move a little bit, and the front of the arrow behind the arrow is the front tip of the arrow is going to rotate a little bit because you've got a null point, which is right behind the arrow tip. That's where the what called the center point of the arrow. If you look at the arrow, the tip do not stay solid. It's right behind it. That's what I call the null point. Now, if you haven't learned that, you need to look at traditional archery. They got a very good explanation what the null point is. That's where the first center point and the tail point of the arrow, that two combined, is where the arrow flex point
What's
these
that
two
called?
points. The null point.
How do you spell that?
N-U-L-L.
No.
So in other words, if you look at the arrow, I'll draw it out. They behave more like this. Like this. That's on a perfect balance arrow. Now if you don't have this, this is the traditional way of doing good arrow. It can be very dramatic, different from the one you see now. Especially high speed. Some of the arrow actually go into multi-wave. Like this is actually a wave like this. And some of them actually, on the super high FOC arrows, they actually behave more like this. Think about what the tail is doing. Imagine this, you got a nail that's soft. You hammer it. The shaft is doing all this. How much force is going down? Now imagine an arrow that's solid, straight. You hammer it, everything's going down. Now, in the old way of people who love super high FOC arrows, what they are really saying is that I'm willing to give up the entire arrow shaft as long as my broadhead goes in. But if I tune my arrow right, an arrow is going straight, the entire arrow is going in. See what the difference is? Now, if only your broadhead is going in, what would you prefer? As high FOC as possible, because that's the only thing that's going in. But if you make your arrow straight, the broadhead's weight is really not important anymore, isn't it?
They need high FOC in order to calm down what's happening up front.
No, they don't want to. They can ignore the effect of the tail of the arrow, because you notice some of the older arrow, and when you shoot the target, the tail of the arrow could do this. Okay. If that do not move and they shoot it, that whole arrow, the tail of the arrow is pushing the same direction as the front of the arrow, which is where the Aerovein becomes different. If anybody who shoot Aerovein will tell you, the moment when they shoot an arrow, when they shoot an Aerovein type arrow, the moment the arrow go up just like normal arrow would, but it hit the pinnacle, the arrow don't go this anymore. The arrow will descend this way and hit the target. At any distance, any Aerovein tipped arrow will hit the target perpendicularly, regardless of distance. That's something that nobody believes in until they shoot it.
I could verify that I've shot out to 100 yards of a vertical bow, and it's flat into the target. It doesn't have that cannonball feature.
So in other words, imagine this is the target, okay? Any single arrow without Aerovein will come in and you hit the target like this. The Aerovein tipped arrow will like this, and then this, and this.
Not only, another benefit to that is when it's dropping flat, not only does your Aeroveins have low drag, as you were saying, but you don't have all that frontal drag in the shaft hitting on the air either. So you have, if you have a 30-inch arrow coming through the air on an angle, you got to be getting frontal drag like it's going right into the
Because
wind.
you're flying like this.
That's because of the lift that's coming off the Aerovein.
No, because the Aerovein is spinning so fast. The tip of the arrow, if it go down, is turned up. So now the arrow, so imagine this, if the arrow coming down, this is pointing downwards, right? Since the arrow is turning, the moment it's turning, the force is turning up. So now all of a sudden it's turning up. Very soon you see that coming up, it become like this.
So it doesn't have anything to do with the lift that could be potentially
It's
gained
the
by
rotation.
It's spinning so fast, it's really dispersing the
Now,
weight.
this is the easiest way to explain this is that imagine you got a drill and you got a garden hose. The garden hose is flexed. The moment you increase speed, when you reach a certain speed, the whole garden hose becomes straight. It's the rotation. But then when you rotate it that much, when every time you rotate with the Aerovein, what does it mean to the arrow itself? The arrow is not flexing that much anymore, isn't it? Second, we are not, when the arrow is going straight like this way, how much crosswind signature we have? The arrow is not flexing. The crosswind signature, remember, we're talking fluttering of the vane itself. What happened to the shaft?
Well, if it's not flexing, you don't have that signature of movement causing the resistance.
Correct, because think about it. This is the tail of the arrow. If it's doing this, the vane is no longer on string on it, the vane is actually on here, and here. Even it's spinning, what you see doing, your drag signature just become this size, and then exaggerate to whatever the outside is. So originally you have say, I'm expecting a 9-inch, how come I'm looking at 12? Well, because the tail of the vane is moving at 3. Well, you just added 3 to the entire 9, now you have 12 now. Imagine this is also, they already told you, you always should shoot a higher spine arrow to make the vane fly better. Well, what they are trying to minimize is this. Which brings us to one of the characteristics of Aerovane. Why I always tell people to put the Aerovane as far back as possible. Now imagine this is your shaft. Your vane is here, right? The moment we put a vane here, and if the shaft go like this, or this, see the angle difference? Yes, this will have more, but the moment when the arrow finally calm down, where the later range is, this part and this part, the angle is different. And the angle of attack is different. Because as you lift the angle further away from the shaft, you want to be as far back as possible. Because I saw it reversed. You should see it this way. Remember, the arrow shaft flex like this way, right? The curve like this. Forget it.
You gave some specs before, I think it was like 3/8 to...
Correct.
With 3/8 to what generally you're trying to say?
You want to be 3 to a half inch, not more than 1 inch for regular bow. See that? See the arrow flex like this, right? If the vane is forward, where's the vane? The vane is actually covering more area, isn't it? If the vane is right here, it should be less and less. See, the beauty of an arrow is the moment you shot it. And sometimes I know a lot of people, a little bit weight on the back actually help the arrow better. Why? Because now the arrow is flexing from 2 point, very evenly. Now if you have super high FOC, ultra high FOC, you are trying to neglect this, then the arrow will flex like this. What's going to happen to the drag? It's horrendous, isn't it? Now the moment the arrow is spinning right and it's doing this, and a little bit of shot like this, and then do this, the vane is doing minimum.
Do you try to maintain a certain percentage difference between, because you're always going to have, let's just say, it's a broadhead or something.
I would
You'll have
say
anywhere
8%
from
with my system.
75 to 125, but then of course there's the weight of the vanes and what you got in the back. The difference between, you say, what's the difference between the front and the rear, what you're trying to achieve?
I would say for my target system, with no wind, 6% FOC is ideal. On the outdoor 3D, 8%. On the hunting, any 8 to 10 is more than plenty if you use my system. I know a lot of my older customers are pushing 30% FOC. But then you're dealing with people who only shooting 25, 30 yards. What I'm trying to offer you is a system that you can shoot in the wind with a low FOC and able to shoot the animal with maximum ability of the shot regardless of weight. That's where the magic, regardless of weight. Now when you think of regardless of weight, all of a sudden your 60-pound bow, your 55-pound bow customers are no longer being handicapped because they don't have enough KE to kill the animal. Now, ideally, the Aerovane will be right here, halfway sticking out behind the shaft. That's the most ideal. Just like if you look at every single airplane, look at the tail wing of the arrow, of the plane. They always go behind the fuselage, isn't it? That's the most ideal. But can we in archery do that? No. So you want to tell your customer, you want to put the vane as far back as possible. That's the exception to this rule, crossbows. How come we don't do that? Because of trigger housing. And not to mention crossbow has significantly heavier spine. We can get away with a lot. But the moment when it reaches a certain speed, the weight of the glue and the vein become critical. If it's not sitting right, not balanced right, not weight right, it will not spin right. And with a crossbow with such high speed, it kick into high gear like that. Vertical bow, you can see, I mean, a normal vertical bow, you won't see a vein spin until something 5 to 7 feet out. It will begin to slowly rotate. The Aerovein 3, you're looking at about 9 inches, it's already start turning. And then when you reach a certain speed like 300, you're going to get that 20, 40, 60 revolution for the first 20 yards. Compared to 6, 8, or 12.
9 to what inches? 9 to what inches? It's
12. That's the reason we go to Aerovein. Now, knowing what we know now, I will squeeze this part into this portion of the class. We already know that the arrow, fletching of the arrow is critical, right? Now the next question is that we know the fletching of the vein is critical, we know the glue is critical, we know all these are important. Now the next question, we know where we're going to put the vein. We're going to pick the vein exactly 1 inch when the back to fit a crossbow. Great. Now the next question, where do you put the first vein? It's a circle, right? Where do you put that first vein? It's a tough one, isn't it? Then anybody will say, well, I'll put the arrow on the machine, I'll shoot through paper, I'll see how the arrow behave. After 4 or 5 through paper, I will find where the arrow behave, and that will be my first vein. Heard of that before? That's what the traditionally we call it the bare shaft tuning. But that is only, I mean, that essentially is a very good way. It's one of the best way, and no doubt. But in order to do a dozen shop, you're going to spend a day and a half on it. Now if you imagine your pro shop, every customer wants you to spend a day and a half shooting through paper and tuning the arrow, what does that mean? How much do you need to charge for it?
Is there a way to look at this as far as using a spine detector and going around and finding that one point where...
That's exactly what it is. In the old days, we got machine like a ram. We'll find out the flow of the arrow up and down, the thickness. Then we have people putting in bathtub to find out the high and the low weight. Then we're people putting bow press and see which way it turned out first. Okay? You ask yourself all these questions. Those are all, what are they trying to do? What are they really trying to do? They want to try to find which way the arrow reacts when you put pressure. That's what it is. You're looking for the first dynamic bend. As a matter of fact, an arrow has multiple dynamic bend, and I want to talk about it after we finish the inserts. Any question on Aerovein before we move into the insert? Because after the insert, we're going to hot and heavy into the shaft. Because that's where everything can tie together. You can stop that. Thank you.